The whole world watched in silence as news about Pope Francis's health grew increasingly alarming. In the Vatican's hallways, cardinals walked hurriedly, their faces serious and their eyes cast downward. The atmosphere was heavy, almost tangible. In a reserved room within the papal apartments, doctors and nurses carefully monitored the vital signs of the man, who for over a decade had led the Catholic Church with compassion and humility. At 88 years old, Pope Francis was facing his final moments. Everyone knew it. But no one expected the request he would make that autumn afternoon, a request that would forever change the way millions of faithful see faith and love for animals. "Bring Benedito to me," he whispered in a frail voice. At first, there was confusion. "Does he want to say a prayer?" one of the cardinals asked. But then Guillermo, his personal assistant since his days in Buenos Aires, stepped forward and calmly explained, "He's asking for Benedito, his dog." Very few people knew about the existence of this dog, a small mutt with white fur and brown spots that Francis had rescued from the streets long before he became pope. The revelation stunned everyone. How had he kept this secret for so long? The Vatican has always maintained strict rules about animals in the papal quarters. But Francis, known for his welcoming and human posture, had found a way to keep his companion close. Benedito lived discreetly in a small room next to the papal apartments, cared for lovingly by a trusted group. At the request, there was hesitation. "Is it appropriate to bring the dog at this moment?" asked one of the senior cardinals. Guillermo looked him straight in the eye and replied with conviction, "It's his last wish. Who are we to deny it?" The chief doctor agreed with a slight nod. And so, moments later, a small, aging dog, about 14 years old, entered the room, moving slowly. What happened next would mark everyone present forever. Upon seeing his friend, the Pope gave a genuine smile. With effort, he reached out his hand and said, "Come here, my friend." Benedito, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, walked to the bed and one of the aides helped him climb up. The little dog gently lay beside the Pope, resting his head on Francis's chest. "Thank you for everything, my faithful friend," Francis whispered, gently stroking the dog's ears. "You have taught me more about unconditional love than many theologians." Tears flowed from the eyes of all, cardinals, doctors, nurses. In that instant, there were no titles, no protocols. Only a man saying goodbye to his best friend. If this scene touched your heart, share it with someone who also loves animals. And if you have a four-legged friend, hug them today. They are angels walking by our side. The story between Francis and Benedito began long before he was elected pope. One rainy night in 2009 in Buenos Aires, then Cardinal Jorge was returning home on foot after visiting a shelter. He heard a whimper coming from an alley. As he approached, he found a puppy abandoned in a wet box. Without thinking twice, he wrapped the little creature in his scarf and took him home. "Look, Maria," he said to the housekeeper upon arriving. He was alone but never lost faith. And so the dog got his name, Benedito. Over the years, Benedito became an inseparable friend. Francis often said in private conversations that animals have the gift of teaching us about God's love, though he never revealed he was speaking from personal experience. When he was elected pope, he adopted the name Francis in honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, the symbol of love for animals and nature. There was a deep personal connection there. The challenge, however, was keeping the dog by his side without breaking tradition. Guillermo suggested discreetly adapting a space in the Vatican. After praying and reflecting, Francis understood that his love for Benedito was a true expression of what he preached: compassion, care, and respect for life. Thus, in a secret operation, Benedito was brought to Rome and lived close to his beloved owner, protected and cherished. Only a restricted group knew of his presence. To the world, the Pope remained an example of simplicity, but now you know this story, a story that shows that even in the highest heart of the Church, the purest feelings of the human soul find their place. After intense days filled with audiences, meetings, and decisions impacting millions around the world, the Pope found solace in the quiet of the night. It was in these moments that he would retreat with his little dog, an aging but ever faithful companion. The small animal patiently waited for the time to curl up beside him, as he read or prayed. Benedito, the pontiff would whisper during his most intimate reflections. Sometimes I think you understand more about true love than many theologians I speak with every day. Over the years, Pope Francis became globally known for his progressive stances on environmental and social issues. His encyclical Laudato Si, addressing humanity's responsibility toward the planet, was considered revolutionary. But what few knew was that many of his reflections on respect for life were deeply inspired by his bond with Benedito, the high, affectionate name of his dog, who now grew old beside him, away from the eyes of the world. Benedito was not just a pet. He had once been a stray puppy on the streets of Buenos Aires, rescued by Francis years before his election. He became a constant presence, a silent inspiration for messages that touched the hearts of millions. Inside the papal apartment, Benedito was showing signs of aging, slower steps, whitening fur, and the need for more frequent care. An Italian veterinarian made discreet visits, always at odd hours, to avoid drawing attention. The Pope observed everything with attentive eyes and a heavy heart, knowing that time with his friend was precious and finite. "He's growing old alongside me," Francis once commented to Guillermo, one of his closest collaborators. "But I feel his heart is still as young as the day I found him." The bond between the two deepened even more over time. Amid the challenges of the pontificate, internal church resistance, external criticism, Francis found peace in simple moments with Benedito. There was something profoundly healing about the company of a being who didn't care about titles, didn't pass judgment, and simply offered love. "Sometimes I wonder who rescued whom," he once confided again to Guillermo during a quiet evening as they watched Benedito sleeping in his special little bed. "He teaches me every day what it means to truly be present, what it means to love without expecting anything in return." These silent lessons began, over time, to appear in his public speeches. When the Pope spoke about the dignity of every living creature, or about how true love recognizes no hierarchies, few imagined that part of it stemmed from his bond with a simple stray dog. In 2022, during a serious health crisis that led to the Pope's hospitalization, there was a moment of great anguish. He had to be separated from Benedito for almost 2 weeks. The aides noticed his recovery wasn't progressing as expected. There was a visible sadness. That's when Guillermo made a bold decision. "Must take Benedito for a visit, even if only for a short time," he told a trusted group. The operation was carefully planned. They used a special transport case and took the little dog to the hospital at dawn when the hallways were empty. The impact was immediate. As soon as Benedito was placed beside the Pope's bed, his vital signs improved almost instantly. "It was as if a light was reignited within him," remarked a nurse who knew the secret. After just 15 minutes of silent contact, with Benedito lying peacefully beside him and receiving gentle caresses, the Pope fell asleep with a soft smile on his face, his first truly restful sleep since being hospitalized. The next morning, to the medical team's surprise, his recovery accelerated remarkably. That moment further strengthened Francis's conviction about the power of the bond between humans and animals, a silent connection capable of healing even the deepest wounds, even in the soul of a man carrying the immense burden of leading millions of faithful around the world. In the following months, the Pope quietly began working on a document intended to profoundly transform the way the Church viewed animals. Although traditional Catholic doctrine already recognized that animals have souls, there had always been a clear separation between the human soul, considered immortal, and that of animals. Inspired by his bond with his faithful companion Benedito, the pontiff began to question this rigid division. "If God is love," he wrote in his personal notes, "how can we impose limits on that love even after death?" This draft, which was never officially published, contained some of the boldest theological reflections of his pontificate. In it, Francis not only advocated for more just and ethical treatment of animals, but also reflected on the possibility that they might share in some form of spiritual continuity. Heaven, he pondered, would not be complete without the creatures who taught us so much about love during our lives. As the Pope continued working on this intimate project, Benedito was also facing the limitations of old age. At 14 years old, his vision had faded, his movements slowed, and he required daily medication. Yet his spirit remained unchanged, attentive, loving, always present during the Pope's long nights of prayer and reflection. It was as if the two shared a silent wisdom about aging and the fragility of life. "We are nearing the end of our journey together, my friend," the Pope would murmur, gently stroking Benedito's now completely white fur. One particularly touching afternoon, about 6 months before his death, Francis made an unexpected decision. During a private audience with a group of children from a Catholic school in Rome, a little girl about 8 years old raised her hand and sweetly asked, "Holy Father, do you like animals? Do you have a pet?" The question caught the aides off guard. Many were prepared to give a diplomatic answer, but after reflecting for a few seconds, the Pope smiled and replied, "Yes, my dear. I have an old friend named Benedito, a stray I found abandoned on the streets of Buenos Aires many years ago. Since then, he has been my faithful companion and has taught me so much about true love." The revelation had an immediate impact. Reporters present began transmitting the news in real time, and within minutes, headlines around the world read, "Pope Francis reveals he has a secret pet dog." The reactions were varied. Some conservatives viewed the gesture as yet another departure from tradition. Animal rights advocates celebrated it as a significant breakthrough, but most of the faithful were simply charmed by this deeply human and affectionate side of the Church's leader. In the following weeks, the Vatican received thousands of letters, gifts, and messages from animal lovers around the world. Many shared their own stories about their pets and how these bonds helped them on their spiritual journeys. Seeing the positive response, Francis decided to take another step. He authorized Benedito to appear briefly with him at a public audience in St. Peter's Square. The image of the Pope, already struggling to walk, accompanied by his elderly, white-furred dog, who could barely keep up, became iconic. Cameras captured the moment when the Pope, with effort, bent down to help Benedito up a small step. A simple gesture that spoke volumes: humility, care, compassion, the very values that defined his papacy. "Look how he cares for his little dog," an emotional woman in the crowd commented. "That's how we should care for one another, Danilo." Days later, in an interview, Francis explained why he had kept his relationship with Benedito a secret for so many years. "It wasn't out of shame or fear of criticism. Our friendship was always something intimate, a personal source of spirituality. But I realized that sharing it could help many people better understand God's love, a love that manifests in many ways, including through our animal friends." He took the opportunity to announce that he was finalizing an official document on the dignity of non-human creatures in the light of Christian faith, a text deeply inspired by his life with Benedito. Unfortunately, in the months that followed, his health continued to decline. Chronic pain, respiratory issues, and heart problems forced the Pope to drastically reduce his public appearances. Yet, even in his final days, he remained dedicated to working on that special document, always with Benedito lying at his feet, like a silent guardian, a symbol of love, friendship, and the purest faith, the kind that needs no words. The little dog, also facing health issues, almost never left his owner's side. It was as if, in mutual silence, they both knew that their time together was coming to an end. In his final days, no longer able to leave his bed, Dom Francisco, as he was affectionately called, constantly asked for his companion, the dog named Benedito, to stay by his side. "He gives me strength," he would tell the doctors, even as they worried about maintaining the room's hygiene. Touched by the deep bond between man and animal, the healthcare team eventually relented. Special measures were taken to ensure that Benedito's presence wouldn't compromise the hospital environment, and so the little dog spent those last nights sleeping in a small improvised bed right next to Francisco. From time to time, he would lift his little head and look at his owner, just as he had done all those years. On the morning of the day Dom Francisco would pass away, Benedito showed different behavior. Usually calm and serene, he began to whimper softly and refuse to eat. When the doctors entered for the morning checkup, they found the little dog lying closer than ever to his owner, almost, as if trying to fuse himself to him. "He knows," one of the nurses said, visibly moved. "Animals have a sixth sense for these things." Later, after a brief nap, Francisco woke up and his first question was, "Where is Benedito?" The little dog had gone out for a short walk with Guilherme, one of the Pope's closest aides. Upon hearing this, Francisco made one final request. "Bring Benedito to me. I want to say goodbye." That simple request triggered one of the most moving scenes ever witnessed in the halls of the Vatican. When Benedito was brought back into the room, the reunion was so profound that it became marked as one of the purest expressions of love ever seen in that sacred place. What happened next was even more touching. Gathering his last strength, Francisco looked at the cardinals and aides present in the room and said, "See how he remained faithful to the end. This is what God expects from us, fidelity, even when we do not understand the greater plan." He then turned to the little dog and, in a soft voice, added, "Thank you for showing me the face of God through your eyes all these years, my friend." Benedito, as if understanding every word, slowly licked Francisco's hand and rested his head on his chest, remaining completely still, as if listening to the last beats of the heart that had loved him so deeply. Francisco passed away peacefully. That very afternoon, Benedito stayed by his side until the very end. The little dog, now quite elderly himself, spends his days surrounded by children, giving and receiving love in a place that perfectly reflects the values his great friend once lived by. Benedito, the stray from the streets of Buenos Aires, now lives in an orphanage, cared for by the nuns who had so admired Pope Francis. Since the pontiff's passing, he seems to carry in his gaze a serenity known only by those who have lived a great love. Despite his advanced age, Benedito still shows signs of vitality whenever he is near the children, especially those who need affection the most. "It's as if he knows exactly who has a broken heart," says Sister Lucia, the director of the orphanage. Many times the children swear they see him staring at a certain spot in the garden, as if waiting for someone. And sometimes, when the sun sets and the light turns golden, Benedito lies down there quietly, as if at peace with time. They say he dreams of Francis. In his dreams, they walk together down cobblestone streets, the Pope laughing and patting his head, just like in the old days. Perhaps in those dreams they are together again, and maybe somehow they truly are. As Pope Francis once said in his last homily dedicated to the most vulnerable, "Holiness is not in titles or garments, but in the ability to sincerely love all of God's creatures." Benedito taught me that, with silence, with his gaze, with his presence. This is the lasting lesson. It doesn't matter how much power or prestige we have. In the end, it's the sincere bonds of love that define who we truly are. Francis, one of the most influential men of his time, chose to spend his final days not with leaders or theologians, but with a simple little dog who gave him something no position could ever guarantee: pure love. And you, who followed this story until now, what has it taught you? Share this message with someone who also believes in the power of love between humans and animals. Tell us in the comments about your four-legged companion and how they changed your life. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one. After all, every time we spread stories of true love, we also spread a little more of the light the world so desperately needs. Health and strength to heal any pain.